Gittin Daf Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, addiction, Onkelos bar achte de Titus. So here we have a very strange piece of Gemara, where the Gemara says at the bottom of Nun Vav Amud Beis that Onkelos bar Klonicus bar achte de Titus have. Onkelos, the son of Klonicus, was the nephew of Titus. The Seder Hadoros brings in the name of the Me'or Enayim, the Maritz Chayetz references it on our Gemara, that this can't be our Onkelos that we know. He lived earlier than this event, and the Vilna Gaon changes the Girsa here and says this is Onkelos bar Onkelos. So this is Onkelos' son, that the story is about. Onkelos' son was a nephew of Titus who destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. We talked in yesterday's shiur about how one has to be able to see the seed of goodness, of sunlight, of optimism in the worst and the most difficult of times. But optimism doesn't mean everything will be okay. It just means that if you take a long view of history and you see the full extent of history, then ultimately things are going to work out for good. And in fact, the seeds of the good are planted in the decay of the evil. And one thinks Onkelos' son is a nephew of Titus. And he was a spiritualist. He knew how to work with the departed souls. So although most spiritualists are hoaxes, but there is such a thing as spiritualism. There is such a thing. We see it in the Torah, that there is such a science to be able to call up the spirits. And there are spiritualists who are genuine. And Onkelos bar Onkelos either was able to do it himself or had access to somebody who could do it. Just like astrology, not every astrologist is authentic. Most astrologists are not, but there is a science of astrology, and we see that in the Torah. So Onkelos bar Onkelos calls up the spirit of Titus, and he says to him, Man choshiv b'hau alma, who's most important in that world up there where you are, Titus? Who's sitting at the top? Who are the people? Down here, it's difficult to know who's important and who isn't important. Down here, you were an emperor, but you had a miserable sort of a death. The Gemara talks about his death. Who are the VIPs up there? Says Titus Yisrael. The Jewish people here have got the front row seats. They've got the prime properties, Am Yisrael. So he says, should I join them? He says, there are too many mitzvahs for them. You're not going to make it. Rather, he says, antagonize them, attack them, and you'll become great, because it says that Kol HaMeitzah Yisrael Naaseh Rosh, that the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't like Jews to be attacked by irrelevant people. When a Jew is attacked, he's attacked by somebody big. So it's, if you want to play big time, become an enemy of the Jews. Becoming an anti-Semite is good for your PR, says Titus to Onkelos bar Onkelos. Later on, the Daf Nun Zayin, Onkelos calls up Balaam. He sees this is working quite well. He's able to get into conversation with all these wicked people. So he gets hold of Balaam Harasha. And he says to Balaam, who's important there? And Balaam says the Jewish people, Israel. So he says, Ma'oli d'buki b'hu, maybe I should connect, I should become Jewish and be part of them. Omale lo tidrosh shlomam v'tovatan kol hayamim. Do not have anything good to do with them ever. Keep away from the Jews. Do nothing good for them. He then goes and he calls up Poshei Yisrael. The Gemara says he calls up the sinners of Yisrael. But in some Gemaras you'll see it's annotated that in the Gemaras before the censorship, our version of the Talmud was censored, and they took out certain parts that could be offensive to the Christians at that time. And in the pre-censorship, it doesn't say that he called up the Poshei Yisrael. It says he called up Jesus. So he calls up Titus, he calls up Balaam, and now he's calling up Jesus, Yoshke. Amale man chashiv bahu alma. He says, Yoshke, what's going on up there? Who has the prime property in that world? Amale Yisrael. 3 people, Titus, Balaam, and Yeshu Anotzri, all say Yisrael are the people here. Ma'oli d'buki b'hu. What about becoming part of them and supporting them, says Onkelos to Jesus? Amale tovatam derosh ra'atam lo tidrosh. Always seek their good. Do good to the Jewish people. Take care of the Jewish people. Never become antagonistic to the Jewish people. That's what he says. Kol hanogea behen kilu nogea bevat eino. If you strike the Jewish people, it's as if you strike your own eye. You blind yourself. It's not a good thing to do. Then the Gemara goes on, and the Gemara says, and it's interesting to see from here, Tachazi ma ben poshei Yisrael in v'eu mot ha'olam. Of the Avodah Zarah. It's interesting to see the difference even between Poshei Yisrael, somebody who from the Jewish perspective left Yiddishkeit, left Judaism, and sinned and created a whole movement against the Jewish people, and look how much bloodshed resulted from that Christian movement later on. That may not have been his intention at all at the time that it was founded. But says the Gemara, see the Rishoyim that have no Jewish neshama at all, Balaam and Titus. Look at them, that even when they're there in Olam HaEmet, they're up there in the world of truth, they can see the world as it really is. They're not dealing with politics. They're sitting in Olam HaEmet, they were sitting in the world to come, they can see everything as it really is. And still they advise Onkelos to be an anti-Semite. Whereas Yoshko has a Jewish neshama. Even though he might have veered off the path from a Jewish perspective during his lifetime, after his lifetime he comes to Olam when he sees the truth and he's able to acknowledge the truth and to advise Onkelos to support the Jewish people and not to antagonize them. Very interesting piece of Gemara. Reb Simcha Zissel Ziv asks a very important question. Simcha Zissel was one of the great Talmudim of Reb Yisrael Salanta, and this question is reported by Reb Chaim Friedlander, who was a mashgiach in Ponevezh Yeshiva, and wrote the Sifsei Chaim. Reb Chaim Friedlander was a Talmud, a very close Talmud, of Rabbi Dessler. Rav Dessler was a great-grandson of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So it's all, you see who it is. And his father was a close Talmud of Reb Simcha Zissel. And Rav Dessler himself was a Talmud of Reb Tzvi Hishbroider, who was Reb Simcha Zissel's son-in-law, and was his successor in the Kelmer Talmud Torah Kelm, which was the center of Torah Musar in Lithuania. And he brings Reb Simcha Zissel's question, and that is, how is it possible that Titus and Balaam, sitting in Olam HaEmes, seeing the world for what it really is, understanding truth completely, and are able to say the most important people up here in this world of truth, in the Olam HaEmet, where only truth counts, in this Olam HaEmet, who are the important people? The Jewish people. Should I become part of the Jewish people, says Onkelos bar Onkelos. No, they say. Be an anti-Semite rather. Asks Simcha Zissel, it doesn't make sense. Why would you advise somebody to be an anti-Semite if you see the truth up there? You know what's really happening. The answer lies in a strange story. There was a man in Kelm by the name of Reb Nottel. Reb Nottel was a businessman in Kelm. And Reb Nottel had a wonderful daughter who he married off to a very great Talmid Chacham. And he supported the Talmid Chacham to learn in Kelm for many years, and eventually it was time for the young couple to make their own way. And the wife, the young woman, says to her husband, we've got some money from the wedding, let's take the money, we'll open a little business in Kelm. I'll work in the business most of the day, just 2 hours a day you'll come and relieve me, and for the rest of the day you sit and learn, because the husband said, I can't leave learning, I can't stop learning to go into business, it's not possible for me. So they agreed, that's what they would do. 2 hours a day he would work in the business. But he began to enjoy the business, and he really got into the business, and he became a serious businessman, to the point where he had no time to learn anymore. And that's part one of the story. Part two of the story, all of a sudden, on Motzei Shabbos, this young woman becomes ill. And they can't figure out, they take her to all the doctors, they can't figure out what's wrong. Somebody suggests maybe she has a dibuk. Now, a dibuk, like astrology and like spiritualism, dibuk is something that is true. There really is such a thing. A dibuk is a spirit of a dead person who goes rogue and enters the body of a living person and hacks the operating system of the living person and takes control of the operating system of the living person. It happens occasionally. Such a thing can happen. Now again, most of the people who claim to know about it and see it are frauds, they're charlatans, but there is such a thing. So they thought maybe there's a dibuk in this woman because they could find nothing physically wrong with her. So at that time, you see how rare it was to understand anything about dibukim. At that time, there was a dibuk specialist who was Reb Mendel of Shtutzin. Reb Mendel of Shtutzin was a Kabbalist. Shtutzin was very far from Kelm. Shtutzin is in what is now Ukraine, between Kiev and the Polish border. So that's a long schlep from Kelm. Shtutzin, by the way, was a place where, in 1941 already, the Ukrainians went in and murdered the Jews. Don't think the Ukrainians are our mates, or we have any kind of historic friendship with them, or that actor Zelensky is anything more than an actor. and some kind of a righteous person. We don't owe anything to the Ukrainian people historically. Of course, today there are other people who mean well, but we don't owe anything to them historically. They took great glee in pogroms, and in this particular case in Shtutzin itself. The Jews of Shtutzin put up a valiant fight against the Germans later on, but most of them were wiped out. So Reb Mendel of Shtutzin, they took the girl to Reb Mendel of Shtutzin, he examined her and discovered there was a dibuk. At first he wasn't sure, he discovered finally there is a dibuk, and was able to get into conversation with the dibuk. He talks to the dibuk and he says, what are you doing? Who are you? Who were you in your real life? Listen to the story. He says, I was a brisker young yeshiva bocher. I learned in yeshivas brisk, and I went to South Africa. And in South Africa, I went off the tracks. I lived the good life, and I stopped keeping Shabbos, and I stopped everything. I went completely off the tracks. And the mother of this boy, of this girl, and of the boy, the two mothers, pleaded with me to enter the body of this girl and make things difficult for her, so that to be metaken, so that she could come to a tikkun, because she did a terrible thing. She took her husband away from Torah, because he started off with 2 hours a day in the business, and then he became a businessman full time, and he should have been a Talmud Chacham, he should have been learning. And because of that, they came to me. I also left Torah. And they asked me to enter her body, and that's why I'm here. So Reb Mendel promised that the boy would go back to learning, and that they would do tshuva, and he davened for the neshama of the dibuk, and eventually he sorted it out, and the girl recovered. Rabbi Elia told the story. Rabbi Lapin told the story to some Talmudim in Kamenetz when he came to Eretz Yisrael. And he said, the story as it was reported is missing an important piece. And he heard the story from Reb Notele himself. Reb Notele of Kelm, he says, I was standing at the fence, next to the fence of the Kelm Talmud Torah, and Reb Notele told me the story. And included in the story was, while Reb Mendel was busy talking to the dibuk started swearing and cursing in the most terrible of language. Reb Mendel had to close his ears, and everybody there had to close theirs. He was swearing terribly. And Reb Elia explained that when a person's midos, when a person's character is corrupted, which happens in lifetimes, our characters become corrupt, and we don't fix the character in our lifetimes, then after life, this was the words of the dibuk that Reb Elia reported. Du'u, you should know, ki im einosim tshuva, that if you don't do tshuva, ve'inasim nekiyim me'achetin, you don't cleanse yourself from the corruption, as hanefesh lemala mit'aveh lara kamo shehaita lemata. The soul in heaven is addicted to the bad behavior as much as it was in heaven, on earth. Addiction is not a physical condition. It's a condition of the neshama. And in order to overcome addiction, you have to achieve self-mastery. And that's what our lives should be about. Our lives should not just be about the operational side of keeping Torah, about this tactical side of keeping Torah. Of course that's important, but it really has to be the main reason we're here is tikkun hamidot, is to improve ourselves, to refine ourselves, to cleanse ourselves, to remove the corruptions in our operating systems, to get rid of the viruses. That's why we're here. And Reb Chaim Friedlander adds and says that's Gehenna. Hell is, you're up in the world of emes and you can see the truth, but you can't do anything about it. You can't get rid of your own addictions. This man was addicted to foul language. So much so, he couldn't even stop using the foul language when he's in Olam HaEmet, sitting in God's presence. He's swearing. Watch your mouth. He couldn't. He'd lost control. Even though he's just a neshama, he's not a body anymore. Says Reb Elia, the bad habits and the addictions that we develop in this world, if we don't cleanse our characters and develop self-mastery, we take it with us to the next world. And then you can't cleanse it anymore. The only opportunity to cleanse yourself is here. It can happen if you go, God forbid, to Gehenna and God cleanses you. That's already a privilege if God takes the trouble to cleanse you in Olam Haba. But to cleanse yourself, that you can only do in this world. And if we haven't cleansed ourselves through personal self-mastery, we take our addictions with us, even to Olam HaEmet. That's an unbelievable chidush that Reb Elia brings. Obviously it comes from Reb Simcha Zissel, and therefore from Bibsrol Salanta, therefore from the Vilna Gaon. We know where it comes from. to understand that that's the nature of addiction. Addiction is not a physical thing, it's not a chemical thing. Of course it's that as well. The body and the soul are one system, they're one unit. You can't treat illness, physical illness, just physically. And you can't treat mental illness just mentally. The body, the physical and the spiritual are one integrated system. They're one unit. They have to be solved together. And addiction is partially a spiritual thing. It's a problem of character. It's lack of self-discipline, lack of self-mastery. And if, God forbid, one dies not having developed self-mastery, you take that addiction with you. It doesn't go away anywhere. So much so that even foul language one could speak. Therefore we explain, what about Balaam and what about Titus? Balaam was filled of kinah. Kinah is a corrupted character. Jealousy to the point of wanting to destroy Am Yisrael, even though Hashem was telling him the truth when he goes for Balak. He knows what he's supposed to do, and all he wants to do is curse Israel, and he can't get the words out of him. But that's all he wants because he's so filled with jealousy. And Titus, so filled with hatred, that he tells Onkelos, Bar Onkelos, become an anti-Semite rather than support the Jewish people, although the truth is with the Jewish people. It's that hatred which is part of their midot. If it's just someone's done an Aveira, okay, you can do kapora for the Aveirot, the soul will be cleansed from the sins we did. But the soul isn't cleansed from the character flaws we have. We have to cleanse ourselves from our character flaws. And that should be our avodah here. And it's one of the things that I worry about and I'm concerned about even here in Ra'anana, that we focus. It's wonderful that we do. We learn Torah, we practice mitzvot, we daven, we do the things we need to be doing. That's great. That's the operational side of Torah. But how much effort are we putting into developing our character, developing our personalities, mastering ourselves, developing self-mastery? Who's teaching the tools? Where are we going to learn the tools of how to do that? Which is what Musar is all about. That's what we should be spending our time learning. That's what a Beis HaMedrash should be. Instead of what are our shuls? Our shuls are a place where we get together, it's wonderful, we have a wonderful davening on Shabbos and a kiddush, and we drink a l'chaim and everything's... But where are we going to a Beis HaMedrash that is dedicated to the development of the human character, to the development of self-mastery? Where is such a Beis HaMedrash in Ra'anana? How many Basei Medrash are there in Eretz Yisrael? I'm not talking about yeshivas where people are there full-time, and even there it's not that frequent. But for Balabatim, where does one go for that purpose? Not just to hear a shiur, or to daven, or to chap a kiddush. But where do you go to make sure that when we come to Olam HaEmes, we have a character that doesn't take with it all the garbage that we've developed in our character while we've been here on this world? That's what we need to be able to do, and that's what this Gemara teaches us. That Titus and Balaam couldn't get rid of it. Even Yoshka was able to get rid of it. It wasn't a character flaw. He didn't have a character flaw. He had a different philosophy and he went a different way. And that's what happened. We know the history. But he didn't have a character flaw. If he had a character flaw, he would have taken it with him. Balaam and Titus had character flaws that they couldn't rid themselves of, even in the presence of Hashem in Olam HaEmet. How important it is for us to make sure that we work on our characters, that we refine our characters, that we diminish our egos, that we live lives of truth, that we see the world as it really is, and that we work not only in the operational and tactical side of Torah, but on the existential and experiential side of Torah, which is what we're here to do, to develop our neshamas, to develop our character, and to perfect ourselves.